Welcome back, everyone, to our classroom called the College of Glycation. I'm Paul Reynolds, a biomedical scientist and professor of cell biology. This classroom allows us to investigate the science of glycation and inflammation and its profound impact on our body. And today's topic focuses on our brain health. If you tuned into our last few episodes, we laid the groundwork on glycation, what it is, why it happens, and how it's a silent driver of aging and disease. Today, we're building on that foundation and zooming in on a topic that hits close to home for so many of us: cognitive decline. We'll explore how glycation and its byproducts, advanced glycation end products or AGEs, worsen conditions like anxiety, depression, and devastating diseases like Alzheimer's disease, other types of dementia, and Parkinson's disease. We'll also tackle the role of insulin resistance, uncontrolled blood sugar in the brain, and the history of medications aimed at tackling these issues. So let's start with a quick refresher on glycation, since it's the foundation of today's episode. You'll likely remember that glycation is a natural process where sugar molecules like glucose stick to proteins, fats, and even DNA in our bodies without an enzyme to control the reaction. It's a bit like caramelizing foods, but instead of a tasty treat, you get a sticky mess that damages molecules throughout our tissues over time. This process happens slowly as we age, but it accelerates when blood sugar levels are high, such as in cases of diabetes or even prediabetes, or when we consume foods loaded with preformed glycation products called AGEs. These AGEs are, in fact, troublemakers. They form when glycated proteins undergo reactions to create stable, harmful compounds. And AGEs don't just sit there. They bind to receptors like RAGE and trigger inflammation and oxidative stress. And as we'll see today, the brain is particularly vulnerable to this type of damage. So with the basics in mind, let's dive into how glycation and AGEs contribute to cognitive decline and a host of other mental health challenges. So let's get to the heart of today's episode. How does glycation and AGEs wreak havoc on the brain, leading to cognitive decline? Now, the brain is an energy-hungry organ. It only makes up about 2% of our total body weight, but uses over 20% of our energy. That means it's constantly dealing with glucose, which makes it a prime target for glycation. When glycation runs rampant, AGEs accumulate in brain tissue, and the results are not pretty. Let's start with the evidence. There was a paper in 2014 published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, or PNAS, by a group led by Dr. Kai. And they showed that mice that were fed a high diet of glycotoxins, like methylglyoxal, which is a precursor of AGEs, developed cognitive deficits alongside insulin resistance. In humans, from the same study, higher dietary AGEs were linked to faster cognitive decline and lower levels of a protective protein called SIRT1, which helps to regulate insulin sensitivity and inflammation. Another study published in 2020 in the journal Nutrients looked at older adults and found that higher dietary intake of AGEs was associated with faster cognitive decline over time. The researchers noted that people with the highest AGE intake, think overly grilled meats, fried foods, and ultra-processed snacks, had significantly worse memory and global cognition compared to those with lower intake. This suggests that what you eat directly impacts how well your brain holds up as you age. But it's not just overall cognition. AGEs are also implicated in specific mental health challenges like anxiety and depression. A review published in the Journal of Nutrients in 2020 found preliminary evidence that higher skin age levels, and that's measured using a technique called skin autofluorescence, were associated with increased rates of depression and even schizophrenia. The idea here is that ages trigger neuroinflammation and oxidative stress, which disrupt neurotransmitter balance and mood regulation. So if you've been feeling more anxious or down, it might not just be about stress. It could also be that glycation is happening in your brain. Now let's talk about the big players in cognitive decline. These are neurodegenerative diseases that are very well known. In 1998, a study in the American Journal of Pathology found that there were abundant ages in the brains of Alzheimer's disease patients. These ages weren't just bystanders, they were actually actively contributing to the damage, co-localizing with proteins like tau and making them much more toxic. The same study found ages in other conditions like Parkinson's disease, where they linked ages to Lewy body formation. Now, that's a key feature of the pathology associated with Parkinson's disease. Now, many researchers have shown that mice fed a high age diet have accelerated degeneration in their brains, a process that is central to Alzheimer's disease progression. And these aren't just lab experiments. Human studies, like one from 2015 in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism, found that higher age levels were very closely linked to worse memory and slower processing speeds in older adults, even in those that did not have diabetes. So the picture is clear. Glycation and ages aren't just aging our skin or stiffening our arteries, they're actually aging our brain as well, contributing to everything from memory lapses to full-blown degenerative diseases. But there's another piece to this puzzle we must address, and that is insulin resistance. Because when your brain cannot handle glucose properly, the glycation problem gets even worse, and some are now calling that glucose toxicity. So this pivot to insulin resistance connects the dots because it is a major driver of glycation in the brain and a massive problem for cognitive health. Insulin resistance is when your cells stop responding properly to insulin, the hormone that helps glucose get into cells to be used for energy. When this happens, glucose builds up in your blood and in the brain, and that is a recipe for disaster because the brain relies on glucose as its primary fuel, but it needs insulin to regulate that process. When the brain becomes insulin resistant, glucose metabolism goes haywire. Excess glucose in the brain leads to more glycation and therefore more ages, and in the end, more inflammation. This creates a vicious cycle. Again, glucose damages brain cells, which makes them more insulin resistant, which leads to more glycation, and this provides really a metabolic train wreck. Now, there was a highly impactful review published in Alzheimer's Research and Therapy 10 years ago in 2015, and that highlighted how insulin resistance in the brain is a key feature of Alzheimer's disease. So much so that some researchers now call Alzheimer's disease type 3 diabetes. The study pointed out that poor glycemic control in type 2 diabetic patients was strongly linked to faster cognitive decline, driven by this insulin resistance glycation loop. So high blood sugar doesn't just damage your pancreas, your fat cells, it damages virtually every body system, including your brain and therefore memory. So now let's talk about what happens when blood sugar is uncontrolled in the brain. Excess glucose directly fuels glycation, as we've discussed, but it also disrupts the blood-brain barrier. And in fact, some have shown that high age diets in mice will significantly increase inflammatory responses that lead to problems with this blood-brain barrier. And in the end, more toxic proteins are able to flood into the brain. Now, this barrier normally strives to compartmentalize delicate brain tissue from the blood supply because harmful things in the blood may cause excessive damage in the brain. Ages are one of those examples. Ages damage this protective feature and allows toxic entities unwelcome access. And this isn't just something we've seen in mouse research. Human study after human study mirror this same characteristic. As if this wasn't hard enough, uncontrolled blood sugar also leads to medication challenges. Many people with insulin resistance or diabetes are prescribed drugs like sulfonylureas or insulin to manage their blood sugar. But here's the catch. These medications don't address the root cause of glycation in the brain and that can be a problem, right? There was a study in PNAS found that while these drugs can lower blood sugar, that's an advantage, they don't necessarily reduce age formation or cognitive decline specifically. In fact, some diabetes medications can even increase the risk of hypoglycemia or low blood sugar, and that in and of itself is a risk factor for cognitive impairment. So we're often treating the symptoms in the clinic, but not the problem, and the brain keeps paying a heavy price. This brings us to a critical point. Insulin resistance and glycation aren't just about Alzheimer's disease. I've already discussed Parkinson's pathology that is worsened by ages, but these same ages are elevated in multiple sclerosis and even other dementias, pointing to a much broader role of glycation in neurodegeneration. So insulin resistance and uncontrolled blood sugar aren't just metabolic problems, I hope you'll see, they are also brain problems as well. They amplify glycation, accelerate age formation, and set the stage for cognitive deficits, from mood disorders to devastating diseases. While historically there have been issues in addressing mental decline in the context of blood sugar and glycation, the science tells us about a much more effective approach. Again, while medications for a few may have a role, they've historically fallen short in addressing the glycation cognitive decline link. This is where diet comes in as a more effective approach. And one of the most exciting dietary strategies for brain health is, in fact, ketosis, using ketones to fuel the brain and mitigate cognitive decline. So let's talk about this dietary approach that's showing incredible promise for protecting the brain. If medications have been a blunt tool against glycation and cognitive decline, ketosis offers a more elegant solution by addressing the root of the problem, glucose overload, or glucose toxicity over a lifetime. Ketosis is a metabolic state where your body shifts from burning glucose to burning fat, producing ketones along the way as an alternative fuel source. And for brains that are battered by glycation and insulin resistance, ketones are like a lifeline. Here's why. When your brain is insulin resistant, it struggles to use glucose effectively. But ketones bypass this problem. They can, in fact, cross the blood-brain barrier and provide a clean, efficient fuel source for neurons, reducing the reliance on glucose and, in turn, reducing glycation. Indeed, research found that in patients with mild cognitive impairment, a ketogenic diet increased brain ketone uptake by 50%, which was associated with improved memory and attention scores. This suggests that ketones can help compensate for the brain's impaired glucose metabolism. But there's more. Ketones also have an anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effect, which directly counters the damage caused by ages. There was a study just a few years ago published in 2021 in the journal Frontiers of Aging and Neuroscience by Taylor and colleagues, and they showed that a ketogenic diet in Alzheimer's patients reduced markers of oxidative stress and improved their mitochondrial function. This is critical because glycation and ages thrive in an environment of oxidative stress, and ketones will help put out that fire. Do what works for you, but a ketogenic diet is one that is low in carbohydrates and high in healthy fats, or even you can address this through fasting. And here's some additional evidence. In 2022, a study done in the journal Nutrients found that older adults with early Alzheimer's disease who followed a ketogenic diet for 12 weeks showed slower cognitive decline compared to the control group, with some even showing improvements in daily functioning. This can be a powerful tool to slow the progression of cognitive decline and improve quality of life. What's the bottom line? Well, medications that have historically fallen short of addressing glycation cognitive risk link can eventually be replaced and real progress realized by understanding how diet and lifestyle can prevent age accumulation. And that's an empowering message. We have more control over our brain health than we might think. So we've covered a lot today. Let's bring it all together and end. Glycation and ages are silent drivers of cognitive decline, contributing to Alzheimer's disease, dementia, and Parkinson's, but also other mental compromise afforded by anxiety and depression. They do this by damaging brain tissues, triggering inflammation, and amplifying insulin resistance, a condition where uncontrolled blood sugar creates a perfect storm of glycation. The latest science points to diet and lifestyle as our best tools for prevention, reducing age intake, improving insulin sensitivity, and protecting our brains for the long haul. So what can you do? First, cut back on high-age foods. Think fried foods, overly grilled meats, and ultra-processed snacks. Opt instead for steamed, boiled, or poached meals that lessen the age burden. Second, prioritize insulin sensitivity. Exercise regularly, manage stress, and consider a low-carb diet to keep blood sugar in check. And finally, stay curious. Keep learning about your metabolic health because knowledge can prepare you and better take care of your mind and your metabolism. Thanks for joining me today. I'll see you next time. Remember, stay sharp and stay healthy.